let's get on, guys. Last week we talked about some CGI versus practical effects.
Right.
And we held it off for this week to really dig deep into it. I hope you guys did your homework and got some opinions.
Yes.
Because we are going to talk deeply about the difference between CGI and practical effects. Is one better than the other? And really, do they have to live together in harmony? So, I was worried about as many movies seem to be returning to all the CGI setups that we saw in the 90s, early 90s, I guess, in 2000s. And I always remember Lake Placid, that movie, and the alligator or crocodile just looking terrible. This was a big problem with the Star Wars prequels, and something that has bothered me with even the Iron Man movies, because his head always kind of looks a little separated from his body when he has the mask off or helmet. The new Alien movie is all CGI, but has gotten amazing early reviews. So, what are your opinions, guys, on CGI versus practical effects?
Well, when done correctly, CGI can be great, obviously. I mean, we've seen it. It's enhanced movies in a way that, and provided these effects that would not be possible with practical effects. But like you mentioned, the Star Wars prequels, you do have some movies listed here that failed that I actually disagree with, but we'll get into that when we get there. But one movie that really stands out to me is Sin City.
Yeah.
That movie, I mean, that movie it would be impossible for that movie to happen with practical effects. And it's one of my favorite movies. So CGI really made that movie what it is. Whereas The Force Awakens, yeah, there's CGI in The Force Awakens is a perfect example of CGI and practical effects, I think, working together. You still have like the guys and like the monster suits and actual like set pieces and stuff, but then when they have to go and use CGI, they can't. It just works. It looks great. It doesn't take you out of the experience.
Yeah. I agree for the most part. I think if it's done in a way where it's not too much CGI and the practical effects are done in a way that is not obvious, like one of the movies that I think about, I think it was in the 90s, Maxwell, Fifth Element,
Yeah.
where obviously all the aliens and bad guys, they really weren't CGI, they used practical effects, and I thought that was done in a way that looked really good. And then also there's a new movie coming out that looks like it's going to be a combination of CGI and practical effects. Valerian. I don't know if you guys have seen the trailer for that.
Right, same guy did Fifth Element.
Correct. And that looks like it's done in a way where they're trying to use practical effects as much as they can, but in obvious situations where that won't work, they're doing CGI. I think if they do it in a way where they're only using CGI in a case of like it has to be done this way, I think that's fine. I think about, I know that you have one of the movies on here, Lord of the Rings. I think about that, but I also think about The Hobbit and how much I love those movies. And those also use a lot of CGI as well. And the way that the trickery that they do where they make the hobbits look really small compared to Gandalf. Like that's not necessarily CGI, it's just camera trickery, right? So
Right.
I think if they're married together in a way that makes sense, I think there's a place for both of them. When I think about some of my favorite movies as my childhood movies, I think like The Terminator, obviously, right? Like that was really when we first started to see CGI that actually looked like it was worth something, right? I think about especially in Terminator 2 when you had the cop that was obviously made of the aluminum, I guess, that could melt down and stuff like that. I remember seeing that as a kid and it just blowing my mind, right?
Right.
But to Justin's point, I think when it's done in a way that, because if you look at the Star Wars prequel movies, they look like they use so much CGI that those look like they took place after the original movies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's really weird.
Which is super weird. So I think it all depends on the time setting, where it falls in the timeline, to what movie if it's a standalone film, that's fine. If it's a prequel, I think all those things kind of come into play of which approach is best. And sometimes even shadows of cats might enhance the background. You just never know.
Yeah.
But
wonder how that'll work with green screen.
yeah, I guess we'll have to see. But what do you think, Maxwell?
So speaking of the Lord of the Rings movies, so those I think were done in an excellent way from beginning to end, except for when they're in the trees, like the giant trees, and it looked like 1950s or something. Green screen effects. It was really bad, like just the movement of the background of the tree in front of it. But with the Hobbit movies, which came out, of course, after Lord of the Rings, the main orc through that whole thing was CG.
Right.
Where in Lord of the Rings, the main orc was practical effects. I mean, they had makeup, everything.
Yeah, and they were terrifying.
And I think the two of those are very noticeably different. Like you can see the CGI in the Hobbit, in that main orc versus the other one, and it stands out a little bit. And there's that shadow again, so that's awesome. As far as the Star Wars prequels, I think some of it too comes from like the design of the spaceships and things. So all of those things seemed more rounded and more futuristic and, like stealthy, I guess, where the older stuff was very boxy and organic looking in a way, right?
Right.
And I think that with the prequels of Star Wars, if they didn't have those ships that were like, I think the main one that they fly in the first episode is kind of very reflective. It's almost chrome.
Yeah.
looking.
Right.
It's very smooth. I think if they went with a direction of like, okay, the ships in Star Wars are very, I don't know how to explain it. I mean, they're very constructed looking.
Yeah.
It looks like there's nuts and bolts holding the stuff together. I think if they did the CG but designed the ships correctly, it could have turned out a little bit differently. I recently found out that, very surprisingly, they did have a lot of miniatures for the prequels. One example is the pod racing.
I did.
They had a a large scale miniature that they used, but even though the CGI was so heavily done that you would have never thought that there was a model there at all.
I honestly think that movie, The Phantom Menace, I really think that was George Lucas getting his hands on some new equipment, some software, and saying,
yeah,
sweet.
Yeah.
Let's see what I can do.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just him. He was just a kid with new toys. That's all it was.
Yeah.
I think a prime example of that, because it came out at the same time when they released the special edition of the original trilogy. He added in all those extra scenes with Jabba the Hutt and such.
So I actually like the Jabba the Hutt scene being added in.
Where Han steps on his tail?
Not the tail part, but did you know why they had to do that, right?
Yeah, because
where they filmed him with a man, he walked right behind him. They couldn't fix that, but I actually liked having Jabba in the movie. But full disclosure, I saw the original unedited trilogy after the special edition. So
Sure.
my first time ever seeing the Star Wars movies was the special edition.
Right.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, so here's where it gets a little sad, guys. No, my parents hated Star Wars, and they didn't want me to know about it, I guess, because we were at the movies one day, and I'm like a kid. It's like 97, right? And a trailer comes on for it, and I know nothing of this universe. And my parents, I can see them both being like, oh no, like he's going to be exposed to this. And after the trailer was over, I looked at my mom and I said, I want to see both of those movies. And she went, there's 3 of them. And I was like, okay, let's go. Like, I want to see them. So, yeah, they kind of kept that from me until I discovered it on my own. But
I see.
Yeah, so
they added a lot of stuff in there.
I've seen the original since.
The part I hate the most out of all of them is where they added in the little musical section where that female weird creature thing comes in and sings a song, and it completely unnecessary and just terribly done. Although there were several releases of the prequels and the special editions where he kept going back in and editing again and again and again. And I think the original release of the prequels had a puppet for Yoda, and then he went back in 2 times and did
the
CGI
Blu-ray.
Yoda.
I think, yeah. So I'm going to ask you guys a question real quick, not to get too off topic here, but this is just something I thought of. When the trilogy came out on Blu-ray, at the Return of the Jedi, it's Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin, but it's Hayden Christensen.
Right.
How do you guys feel about that? Because continuity-wise, it makes sense.
Not to me.
I mean, because Anakin never made it past that point. Anakin died
Yeah, but it should have been him as old man, not him as young.
Well, it was an old man, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I get it, but I don't
Because
like it, but I get it. You know what I mean? It's one of those weird love-hate things.
I you have to explain how you get it, because to me, the way I view it is it's Anakin, right? I mean, he becomes Darth Vader because he's still alive. They keep him
Anakin
alive.
never became that old man though that we saw in the original cut.
Yeah.
How's that not make sense?
It just doesn't because like he was like scarred and burned, and like that old man's just like, "What's up? I'm just some old dude in a Jedi robe."
I see what you're saying.
me,
Visually, he should
yeah.
have been a distorted old man if
Yeah.
he was going to be an old man.
Yeah, he never should have been a peaceful-looking old guy. He should have looked like a, I don't know, a mess.
I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot more
Yeah.
sense. I never thought about the fact
Yeah,
that,
my
like,
bad.
old man was like, I got hair and I look normal. You know,
Yeah,
and
'cause he didn't have
suddenly
arms
have
and
this
he-
robe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's just like, "Oh, I'm back in the Jedi Council now, in Jedi heaven."
Yeah.
I mean, that just doesn't.
It's
I
interesting.
don't know.
It's very interesting. And obviously, you don't want to see a deformed. Damn this
Or a cat.
Obviously, you
Yeah,
don't
it's
want
just
to
one
see
of
the
those things-
deformed, like half human floating there with like half
Yeah,
an arm or
it's-
something. But
Yeah, it's like I get the decision to change it to Hayden Christensen. I don't necessarily like it, but I respect it. Like I don't hate it either.
yeah,
just one
there were
that-
things where they added in. Oh man, what did they do?
They added Gungans to that part too. Them saying like, "We won" or something. I don't know.
Yeah, bunch of weird stuff. But
I know.
Gungans.
Just to fix the continuity.
but you said there was
of all the
something
changes.
in one of these lists that you disagreed with. What was that?
Okay, well, I actually one part of it I misread. You put the Mummy Returns. I agree that movie was not great, but the first Mummy was great. With the guy turning into like the sand face or
Yeah.
whatever.
I think he's referring to CGI specifically with
to
the
the
Rock.
scorpion.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't read that. I didn't see all of that
Yeah,
at first.
That
but
looked awful.
Oh man, but that was The Rock's
Yeah.
first big thing, and after he did that role, which apparently, because I watched a behind the scenes like an interview thing, well, not even behind the scenes, it was a recent interview he did, where he said with that movie it was like 110 degrees outside, and he had like a cold or the flu or something. He was real sick, but he was like, I got to give it my all. And the next day after recording, they called him up and they were like, all right, we liked you, we want to do a standalone movie with you. So he obviously made a good impression, but that movie doesn't do him a whole lot of justice, I think. So maybe the
Right.
people, like, while they're recording, were like, wow, this guy's got it. But man, that CG was just bad.
One thing I did want to add is you had the Matrix Reloaded fight scene. Which fight scene are you referring
I assume
to?
when all the agents are fighting Neo.
Yes.
I thought that was the last one.
No.
Was that the second?
Well, it happens a lot through the second and third
It
one.
does. You're right.
But this fight specifically is the first time that Neo comes across all the Agent Smiths. He sees the one and he's like basically thinking like, I thought you died, and then like all of them start showing up, and then he's
is it when
fighting
he's with
all
the
of them.
Oracle?
Yeah.
And he pulls up like the pipe.
When they're in the
Yes.
little
And
courtyard area.
he like
Okay.
spins
Yeah,
around
that
the
one
pipe
is
and like
terrible.
knocks them all down, and
My bad.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the really cool one with like all the medieval weapons and stuff, because that one today
that
is like my
scene's
favorite
awesome.
fight scene. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on Mad Max Fury Road. Like that was a good combination of CGI and then also practical effects, because I know a lot of the stunts and stuff in the movie they actually did, and the guys going back and forth on the poles and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I know that's part green screen, but there's still people going back and forth on those poles. So
yeah. So and this the next one. Well, one of the ones I have on the list here is iRobot. That movie, like the whole time, was a futuristic, and then it's just obviously a robot that they have to make CGI. And I felt like that one was done extremely well. Now, I Am Legend, another Will Smith movie, it was a great movie, but then when you got to see the CGI like creatures or whatever, they looked terrible.
They did.
yeah,
But everything else, the production value was so high, and like cities really looked like they were overgrown with grass and all that. But man, the most important second characters in the movie were terrible.
yeah,
If you want to talk about bad CGI, Lost.
yeah.
That show is so good, but it has
Smoke monsters.
awful CGI.
I'm excited because you have the Jungle Book on here, but it makes me also excited for the new Lion King movie.
Yeah.
That's going to be very interesting. I mean, the visuals from the Jungle Book look great. I really wonder how this is going to work out with the Lion King.
Because I think it's interesting when they, because it's one thing to have CGI in a completely CGI'd environment, but it's another thing to have something CGI'd in on top of real world. So
Yeah, and right, and go back to Mad Max Fury Road. So obviously they made all of those vehicles for the cap. They made all of the vehicles for the movie, which is incredible. The environments, however, were partially real. Almost everything in those visually were added in, and that was a very impressive movie because the CGI in that movie, honestly, I couldn't tell you what was a real landscape and what wasn't.
Well, enough about what we think. What are some of our listeners think, Maxwell? I know we posed a question to them, right?
Yeah, so here's the winner actually came down. 56% of our listeners thought that practical effects were the better choice. And then 22% for CGI and 22% said that both of them were a must. And I'm probably more along the lines that they both need to be mixed well together. For examples like we were talking about with Mad Max, Tron Legacy is a movie that's almost 100% CGI.
It's so good, though.
Yeah,
so good.
But so to me, I think it's really comes down to like at the beginning of making this movie, we got to know what our budget is, and is it going to be primarily CGI or not? Right. Okay, if it's primarily CGI, can we afford it, and can we afford a studio that makes it look good?
Right.
You know, I'd mentioned Sin City earlier, but now that I think about it, they used a lot of practical effects too for like Mickey Rourke's character.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his face is that's not his face. I mean,
which looked better than his real face does.
You know,
sadly enough, it did. Yes.
What I also think about practical effects, I think about how awesome Ron Perlman looks as Hellboy.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And the second movie was so much better.
Have you seen Fantastic Beasts?
Yeah.
With him in it? It's so weird to see him like CGI'd into a goblin.
Oh,
it's like it's his face, but it's on a goblin body. Yeah,
that's right. I forgot about that.
That was him. Yeah. What camp are you in, Justin? Are you for CGI practical effects or?
I prefer practical effects, but I also I think both are a must. Now it varies case by case, you know, for each movie, but I do think generally both are necessary.
I think both are a must for me as well. The only reason I say that is like I would hate to see a movie be pigeonholed into making a movie look a certain way because they're so against CGI. You know, so I think if you can, depending on the time and setting, I think there's a place for both.
Yeah.
As long as they complement each other, so to speak.